morning, everyone, and welcome to Phorum. We have a new facility this year. I think you'll find the program is going to be very exciting today, and appreciate everyone driving through the weather this morning to get here on time. We'll begin with a presentation by Peter Coffey. Peter Coffey's been with Salesforce for 8 years, even though some people are still surprised to learn he's no longer a columnist at eWeek, where he spent the previous 18 years. Before that, he spent 10 years in oil and space. He got pulled into IT in 1983 when company management sent a spy to the IBM PC user group and wrote down the names of the 4 people answering most of the questions. Since then, he's worked with companies and governments in the US and Canada, EU, Asia, and Latin America on building trust and accelerating application development with cloud services. In a perfect world, he'd be able to spend his time teaching math, science, and history disguised as SETI. His presentation today, From Silos to Systems. In this session, Peter, VP for Strategic Research at Salesforce, will discuss how to move from siloed technologies and innovation to holistic systems, a presentation that explores the transformation of the technology ecosystem, producing organizations that are leaner, faster, and competitively agile. Please welcome Peter Coffey.
Thank you. When you meet with a group pretty much annually, it really does force you to look back at the previous 2 years of presentations and say, okay, make sure there are not any oldies but goodies in here without at least explaining why you're repeating yourself. The good news is that this year I put together the presentation I thought you would need to see and then found that there was pretty much zero duplication from anything I've said before, because at this point, the things that we've discussed over the past few years are really just the context for the things that are actually interesting now. And what was very much a conversation about the modernization, the streamlining, the cost cutting of IT for our first 15 years as a company is really now just the foundation for the far more interesting conversation that's going on, that's driven not so much by what the IT department would like to accomplish or what the CFO would like the IT department not to spend, but by the changes in customer behavior, the changes in the structure of global markets, and even the redefinition of who are the competitors in various markets. And I'll be providing some very specific examples of that as we go along. Salesforce is, of course, a publicly traded company. It is conceivable that in my enthusiasm today, I may make forward-looking statements. I am not pre-announcing any products, but you knew that. There's a chart that we use in a lot of our talks that irritates me, because it seems to me to suggest that technology progress is just this inevitable, rock rolling down a hill, and that Moore's law is just going to make things happen. And I like to remind people there are specific reasons why we've made some of these wrenching changes over the last few decades. I mean, the mainframe is actually more popular today than it's ever been. Mainframe transactions now can be deployed in more ways, but now IBM talks about mainframe capacity in units of how many movies can you get on and off a processor per second. The requirements of bandwidth really have no upper bound. Really, no upper bound. At some point, for example, there will be 30 or 40 cameras around the rim of the stadium, and your TV will analyze the imagery and synthesize in real time a view of the play from any angle you choose. This is technically possible. At some point it will be cost effective, and the sports fans will want it. And that's what's going to be happening. There's never going to be any time when there's, quote, enough bandwidth. But mainframes represent a very high, a forbiddingly high capital barrier to entry, so smaller systems emerged, client server, PCs, and so on. And everyone said, oh wow, this is going to be amazing. Well, there turned out to be some fairly serious problems with the PC. It was not well designed for collaboration. You wound up with slightly different versions of key files on various machines, people doing things on networks that were really not designed with any real discipline in terms of things like configuration management. And this turned out to be a tremendous problem. The dreadfully slow, the glacially slow pace of innovation in the PC space. It was only late last year, for example, that Windows XP, 13 years old, was still running a third of the world's PCs and only barely being overtaken by Windows 8. despite $12 billion having been spent to create Vista, Windows 7, and then, of course, later on Windows 8. Microsoft finally did put a gun to the head of Windows XP and say, no, really, we're going to kill it this time, and put out a little widget that systems administrators could run on their desktops that counted down the time to the end of support for Windows XP. This widget, however, required Vista or later to run, so I think they may have missed the point. Then this cloud thing came along. Now, some people thought the cloud was really just about this: no capital barrier to entry, just sign up for the seats and to get a subscription model pricing. I could take the old legacy stack, centralize it in an external data center, do subscription pricing, and call that cloud, but then I wouldn't be getting any of the things that are actually interesting about it. I would not be getting the ability to do multiple upgrades per year without resulting in torches and pitchforks processions of angry customers. I would not be able to say, look, all your stuff is above this line as metadata, and all our stuff is down here, and we can do things down here without breaking your stuff up there. The old architecture moved to the new setting would not give you that. It would not give you what people today absolutely demand. You may have seen the cover of The Economist maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, Planet of the Phones, and someone said, number one, it would have been funnier, and number two, it would have been more accurate if they'd called it Planet of the Apps. Because really, it's the apps that are the exciting part. I mentioned this yesterday, and someone said, are you sure you're not talking about mobile browsers? Mobile apps are now the dominant means of access to digital resources for people in the US. They spend, and someone challenged me on this, I went and checked the data. 2 hours and 42 minutes a day is the average time that people interact with a mobile device. Only 20 minutes of that in a browser, a mobile browser. The apps really are defining the experience that people are having. And this one, and I'll mention a couple of examples on this one, if all we could do was just say, by the way, from now on, the typical IT project will be delivered on time, on budget, on spec, there are people who really have a hard time wrapping their heads around that idea. It's like saying you've got perpetual motion. They say, no, wait a minute, you don't really mean that, do you? A true story. You have a wonderful 311 system here in Philadelphia, which I'll mention later as a case study. York region up in Canada loved that and wanted to do a 311 for themselves, and we and our partner were busily delivering it on schedule, on spec, on budget, when we got a somewhat sheepish communication from the York region saying, we didn't actually think you were going to be delivering on time and we're not really ready. Could you slow it down, please? That's not a request that's often heard in public sector IT procurement. And then this one, the pace of innovation, and that's, of course, what's really key. The ability to deliver new capability to customers, to respond to new competitive challenges, to take advantage of phenomenal new opportunities in connected products and distributed processing. We'll talk about that in a little more detail later on. So we spent, as I said, as a company, 15 years saying, cloud is about cutting complexity. And really now it's about something much different. It's about connection, creating community. This is bandwidth growth. The mildly crazy hockey stick curve is fixed broadband subscriptions per person. The ridiculous hockey stick curve is mobile broadband subscriptions per person. Some of you have heard us mention this before. We've done a lot of work in Haiti, providing contributed resources there for a country that's been devastated by earthquake and hurricane and whatnot. They have 70% unemployment and they have 70% smartphone adoption. If there's one thing you need when you're in an environment where there's hardly any support, is something that will connect you to what little support does exist. It's extraordinary to see how the cell phone, once the badge of the elite, has just become the token of identity and connection that everybody feels they need to have. And people with maybe 20 mobile broadband subscriptions per 100 people on the planet are rapidly being overtaken by devices. Cisco runs a counter on their website that tries to keep a reasonable estimate of the number of connected devices in the world, 15 billion as of March. They used to say that maybe there would be 50 billion by 2020. I'm now hearing a consensus number closer to 70 billion connected devices by the year 2020. Nicholas Negroponte at MIT Media Lab said this many years ago, don't think of the future digital connected era as you talking to someone across town. It's more like your left cufflink talking to your right cufflink. The degree to which you will be part of a hierarchy of systems. And people ask me, well, what's the platform going to be to do that? That's exactly as wrong a question as asking, what's the platform that runs the human body? When you jerk your finger away from a hot stove before you feel the pain, that was a relatively low-level piece of code, as it were, operating that doesn't even involve your brain. It just goes from the finger to the spine and back. There's a higher-level piece of processing that says, that hurt. And a much higher level and much slower piece of processing that says, I need to warn people that this is hot and they shouldn't touch it. These are hierarchies of systems that have much more simplicity, much more speed at local levels, and then bigger. So people who say, oh, cloud is centralization, people who say, oh, cloud is putting everything together in one place, that is not merely wrong. It is the actual opposite of right. We are building systems in which there are going to be multiple layers, multiple degrees of local response for simple things and collaborative global analysis for the big data projects that are going to teach us how to cure cancer, for example. These are real, and they mean that this is not simplification. It's taking the non-value-adding complexity off of your plate and putting it on someone else's plate. Overall, we're all going to be orchestrators of layers of system in a way that's profoundly different from running, say, a mainframe. Some of you have seen me use this graph before. It looks like a map. It's the output of an algorithm that a Facebook intern devised. I don't know if Randy's here yet, but well done. To connect points in geospace with lines that represent the number and the activity of Facebook friend pairs between those 2 points. And it's interesting to see that without drawing a single line on a map, I can still get something that looks like a map of the world merely by saying, show me the Facebook friend interactions. There's a big void up there where you would expect China to be, but those of you who can see the lines converging on certain points can quickly find Beijing at the center of one of those convergences, for example. The map of the people to whom you would like to sell, the people who would like to compete with you, the people with whom you would like to collaborate. These maps are literally drawn now by the connections, by the interactions that people are finding the opportunities to have. And the result is a profound change in market behavior. This is IBM research from last year. The single dominant force today affecting people's purchasing behavior is what are their friends saying about stuff that they have bought. I don't know if you've ever gone out and bought a Super Bowl ad. We only did it once. 30th of a second costs $5,000. 30th of a second frame, one frame of video, $5,000 bucks. So after 900 of those frames, if you're very, very lucky, people will pay your ad the ultimate compliment and ask their friends if you're actually any good. And if you fail that audition with the friend network, then you just wasted an awful lot of money, didn't you? Research from Capgemini and MIT Center for Digital Business has confirmed everything you've always thought marketing involved is still absolutely necessary. You must still create awareness of and interest in your brand and familiarity with the products and the services that you offer. But today, all that will do is get someone to the threshold of paying you the compliment of consulting their friend network to ask if you're actually any good. Absent that vigorous endorsement from an evangelistic, enthusiastic customer community, you essentially have no marketing. What that means is that what used to be borderlines between disciplines like sales and service and marketing, it's really quite dangerous to consider those to be separate functions today. Every service interaction with a customer is an opportunity to intensify their delight in being your customer. This isn't damage control. This is an opportunity to remind them that working with you is worth the markup you charge over the bargain basement alternative. American Express research has been very clear on this. The fraction of people who say they would knowingly pay more than the market bottom price for a product has risen over the last 3 years from 9%, from 50% to 67% of people say they would knowingly pay more than the market bottom price, while the markup that they would consider reasonable to pay has also grown from 9% to 13%. In short words, more people are willing to pay a little bit more to have a less frustrating experience after the sale. This is key. You can see this in behavior with organizations like, for example, Trunk Club, which applied a phenomenally technically enhanced notion of customer service to figuring out why men don't buy more clothing. Notice they didn't work really hard on selling more. They worked hard on figuring out the barriers of their target market to buying more and worked it from the customer point of view. I used this example for several years, pointing out that Nordstrom's might not think of Trunk Club as a threat because their volume is so tiny. But then again, I've also compared this to GM versus Porsche. GM made an average of $80 profit per vehicle last year. Porsche made an average profit of $24,000 per vehicle last year. Nice business to be in. The punchline of this story is that last year Nordstrom's bought Trunk Club. This means that who is your competitor has also to be reevaluated, because the old competitors were easy to find. They were right there in the yellow pages right next to you. They had factories that looked like yours. They showed up at the same trade shows right next to you. They made substitutable products. And if they were bigger, they would threaten you with scale. And if you were big, the little ones would threaten you with agility. And everybody knew what the rules were. Well, the new rules are rather different, because customers can now discover someone that you've never heard of by completely viral processes with no traditional marketing whatsoever. Uber, of course, has gone from 0 to 55 countries in 5 years. They defy categories. Who is Uber's competitor? The taxi companies? That's merely obvious. There's an Uber driver with a showcase in the back of the car for the custom jewelry that he makes, which is his real job. And now he's putting that jewelry literally in the face of people who are a captive audience for 20 to 30 minutes on their way in from the airport, and probably represent a pretty good market for upscale custom jewelry, because after all, they fly. This is doing rather well. 5 other drivers now also have showcases for this guy's jewelry in the back of their cars, and he's paying them a little bit of a commission on that, and he's making 6 figures. I don't think Zales ever thought of Uber as a competitor. And yet, here we are. Here we are. And so the comment that has been made by a friend of mine who used to be at ADP is that if you are asking who's my competitor, and you do not even mention any of Google, Amazon, eBay, PayPal, Square, or Uber, you're just not thinking from a genuinely customer-centered point of view of what are the experiences that people might be curating in which the product that I thought I sold and the franchise that I thought I had in the marketplace could simply be subsumed by an experience that someone who knows my customer better than I do is ready to curate. What an interesting idea. If Uber knows where they're picking you up and where you're going, if they know, for example, that you're on your way to a social occasion, maybe they've got a profile of you that says that when you visit people, you like to bring wine, or maybe you like to bring flowers, or whatever. Conceivably, Uber Lux, the next level Uber service, can say, when we pick you up, would you like to have a bouquet of roses and a bottle of Pinot in the car waiting to take to the person you're visiting? Would you like to do that? And then FTD is saying, what just happened? We thought we owned the business of providing flowers for social occasions, and now we're just a cog in Uber's supply chain? What? Yes, this could happen. Don't let it happen to you, because, as my friend David McInnish once said, when Google enters your market, they don't just settle for eating your lunch. You wake up in the morning and they're in your kitchen making breakfast. Many people find that a powerful and exciting image. Now, you're not going to be able to do this with what we used to call software. We know what software is. You take the activities of the business, the things you have to do to run the business, and remember that wonderful verb from the 70s? You computerize them. You take your pure overhead costs and make them smaller, and this is good. Now, I've shown that chart to higher education, where the silos are labeled admissions, academics, housing and dining, and alumni relations. Pick your industry, pick the names of the activities that have been over time individually automated and individually siloed. And the customer just can't stand it. Because every time they deal with you, depending on what phase of the operation they're in, they have to explain themselves all over again. You have no idea of who they are. This is devastating for your field sales forces. They show up to sell someone the latest and greatest, and the customer says, I'm sorry, I really don't want to talk about spending any more with you. I've got 3 out-of-limit service cases with you guys. The sales guy had better not be blindsided by that. The boundaries between sales and service and marketing simply have to be condensed. We used to take those activities and wrap them in COBOL and be surprised, and we got silos. What did you think was going to happen? That's what these systems were designed to do, is build silos. Well, the customer wants to live in a different world today where it is all about them. They expect this. Some companies are delivering this. And if you're not prepared to say, I'm not going to look at the efficiencies I'm trying to achieve, I'm going to look at the experience the customer is going to try to have and really craft an environment which anyone who deals with the customer, and someone used this phrase at an event we did with the Philadelphia Salesforce user group yesterday. Every employee, you know how at Disney they don't call them employees, they call them cast members? Well, in this guy's company, they said, everyone in this company is a concierge. Everyone in this company is a part of the process of making every customer feel that they are receiving that level of luxury hotel personal service. In fact, someone said this about the Apple stores the other day. Apple did not go out and look at Circuit City and Best Buy when they were figuring out how to build the Apple stores. They went to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and the other high-end hotel chains and said, what are they doing that make people feel like they've walked into a place that they're looking forward to visiting? They really did craft this, and maybe most of you are aware of this. The Apple retail chain is the highest revenue per square foot of any retail chain in the world, and I'm including Tiffany in that. And what this means is that instead of relying on silos to separate data by levels of sensitivity and financial and so on, you need to have shared truth, but selective visibility of that shared truth. Yes, you need to have very precise, granular management of privilege and trust and security here. These are still really important things to do. But you need at root to have a shared truth, that you are not constantly asking questions about what goes back and forth. And even in your hand, silos are emerging. The fact that you have to have a search feature to find apps on your phone should be telling us that there's something wrong with the architecture here. Every one of those apps is a little micro-silo. This is not a good idea. And we're getting better. In fact, what iOS and Android both do now is have this thing where you swipe down from the top, and the apps have gone borderless. And they're all able to surface important data and actions you might want to take and decisions you might want to make in a way that's completely independent of the siloing of the individual apps, and they're actually starting to be collaborators. And I would encourage you to think about this. Don't think of an app as building a new little silo. Think of an app as adding a few pages to the dictionary of the verbs you know how to process. So what used to take 3 paragraphs now becomes like 3 API calls. And rethink that architecture in a way that says, every time we learn how to do something new, we just add a few pages to the dictionary of the things we know how to have a conversation about. Now, there's an expression called Lake Wobegon effect. Garrison Keillor, in his mythical town where all the children are above average. This is a survey that Forbes Insight just published of, how do you think your company's doing on this goal to become the next generation of customer service? 80% of wholesale distribution and manufacturing companies think they're doing better or significantly better than their peers. I'm not sure that's mathematically possible. I'm fairly certain it's not. Financial services, 74% are above average. Ooh, boy, the guys at the bottom must really suck. And communication, telecom, technology, I'm sorry. Many of us have an inflated opinion of ourselves in just how well we're doing on this, and we need to be listening aggressively. We need to be out there in communities with customers, listening and saying, what is the kind of experience you're having here? We need to be beta testing that experience. We can't all be above average. Now, I've mentioned that I was going to mention a couple of case studies. By the way, am I supposed to be finished at 9? I kind of lost track of the timeline here. I've got 10 more minutes. Good. That's all I need. This is good. Here we are in Philadelphia, where your first 311 system was such a great success that it essentially melted down glowing white hot from citizen activity. This is good. This is a good problem to have. But the city said, let's not just do another one, only bigger. Let's not just go into the marketplace and find the least unsatisfactory packaged 311 solution. Let's go with a platform that's malleable and extensible and build a 311 system that's uniquely evolving all the time to meet the demonstrated needs of the citizens of Philadelphia. And your city's customer service officer, is it Rosetta Carbon-Lew? She's an amazing leader. And when she talks, she doesn't talk about technology. She talks about the experience she's creating for the people of Philadelphia. And this is a really great thing. Now, here's a somewhat different story. Eurostar literally runs the trains of Europe. They were 2 full release cycles behind on a hairball of 13 applications that have been glued and baling wired together to be their customer service system. And they said, even if we had the money for the hardware refresh and the massive investment that would be necessary to do this 2-release catch-up thing, it would probably break most of our customizations. We'd be re-implementing everything. So what if we just moved completely to a cloud platform? Since there were no guarantees that anything they had was going to survive the upgrade anyway. What they discovered is that apart from the obvious IT gains of not being on this upgrade treadmill anymore, they were going to get shrinkage of change implementation time from order of 2 years to 2 quarters down to order of 2 days to 2 hours. That was a dividend. That was something they weren't even thinking about as the reason for doing this. This, by the way, is what happens in many organizations. They say, we did this for the cost justifications. Then we discovered the business benefits of just being able to respond to customers and tie things together. And Aperio did a study on this, and they said the typical company 6 months later says, boy, did we spend way too much time on cost justification. Cost justification is the worst reason to do this. And when people ask me about that, I say, do you really think that Uber thinks of IT as an overhead to minimize? I don't think they do. I think they see it as the force for value creation, and they look for it in terms of ROI. This one is a pretty amazing story. We've been going through this 50-state exercise in implementing new healthcare systems. Oregon tried to build a state healthcare exchange. And the company that the well-known yacht racer runs out in Redwood City was kicked out after billing them $160 million to sign up exactly 0 people. Really, I'm not exaggerating. Exactly 0 people were able to complete registration on that system. And 2 weeks later, the government of Oregon went public and said, this thing is such a smoking hole in the ground, it's not even fixable. We're going to abandon it. We are going to walk away from it and move Oregon onto healthcare.gov. Meanwhile, at the other end of the country, Massachusetts had a working state healthcare exchange, which Governor Romney could have run on as a candidate in 2008, but wound up running against in 2012, thanks to the behavior of the Republican primary process. They needed to make certain adaptations to that system to make it compatible with Affordable Care Act, sometimes called Obamacare, and discovered that it really wasn't adaptable. They are abandoning that working system and moving Massachusetts to the federal healthcare.gov site. So start from scratch, can't be done. Start with what you have that's working, try to change it, can't be done. Meanwhile, Colorado went live on a pure cloud platform, ours, as it happens, on June 1st of 2013, and deployed their first iPad app. On the afternoon of June 1st, 2013. There's a 3.5-minute YouTube video out there where they talk for at least 2.5 minutes about the glowing future of Colorado healthcare. And maybe mention for a couple of sentences, oh yeah, well this is on a cloud platform, so there's really no drama here. Nothing to see, move along. 13 other Colorado agencies are now in the process of re-platforming, having seen this experience. I would just as soon abandon the word cloud completely. I have said many times that that little puffy cloud logo we use would be like BMW still using a picture of an airplane propeller as their logo, since they were originally an aircraft maker. The BMW logo with the blue and white quadrants suggests a spinning propeller, but it's not an actual picture of the darn thing. Well, I'd be happy to drop the word cloud and just talk about outcomes. Will you be able to say, I don't need to wait for capital budget, I don't need to license software, I will get faster ROI? Will you be able to say, I'm going to get drama-free upgrades? Will you be able to say, anytime a new device like the Apple Watch comes to market, I'll just be able to deliver views of my data on that device without having to license anything new? Will you be able to say, I'm not going to have to incur big upfront costs for licenses, I'll just pay as I'm going, as I'm using for stuff? And will someone else worry about the increasingly complex and critical thing called security? Someone at Pacific Telecom Forum in Honolulu this year made an interesting comment. They said, look at the Target situation. Number one, it wasn't a cloud that was breached, it was their own on-premise systems. So doing it yourself is not the better way to go. But this was the more interesting point. A breach of financial data did not result in firing the CFO. A breach of customer trust resulted in firing the CEO. It was an existential threat to the company to have customers feel that they just couldn't safely shop in those stores. I think they've probably come back. The numbers suggest that they're going to recover from this. But this is the new game we're playing here, because you're not doing financial data that you can fix by sending someone a check. We're not doing logistics data that you can fix by sending someone a replacement shipment. This is lifestyle data, personal health data, education, work history stuff. Once it's out, you can't put it back. Are you familiar with the phrase Streisand effect? There was a coastal photographic survey of California that was conducted several years ago that put a high-resolution picture of Barbara's backyard out online, and she was aggravated, aggrieved, outraged by this intrusion upon her privacy. At least 7 people had looked at this picture when she went public with her complaint. Orders of magnitude later, we had a phrase, Streisand effect. There's a Wikipedia page for this, which is the dramatic intensification of a data breach by an effort to fix it. There's lots of examples. And so the need to have someone else with world-class skills and technology doing the trust for you is key, so that your people can do the really interesting things of creating value. So there's a lot of gloom and doom out there about technology replacing people. I'm sorry, I don't see it that way. Communities have an amazing effect. Customers who will leave you for someone else's price promotion will stick with you and say, hey, what are we going to do about this? How can we work together to maintain my relationship with you? I can give you 3 or 4 months, but then I'm going to have to move to the other guy who's cheaper. Do you realize what that's worth to a company instead of just having people leave and having to figure out what just happened? When customers feel like they're part of a community with you, they will counsel you on how to keep their business. This is priceless. And if you are not doing this, if you are still doing traditional content bombing marketing, instead of building a community of customers who will treat themselves as a confederation of advisors to you, then you are passing up a really strategic, important thing to be doing. There is a war for talent out there, and collaboration, not only internally but externally, is what wins that war for talent. I had a CIO tell a ballroom of colleagues, forget anything you've read about 15% unemployment. For the people you want, the unemployment rate is more like 2%. The good people are really hard to find and are being paid accordingly. And finally, customers are the worst possible reporters of what went wrong with a product. They weren't looking for symptoms before the failure. They were just trying to get things done, and when it failed, it caught them by surprise. Surveys are late, ineffective, and frequently inaccurate. People do them anyway. Someone said the other day that most of what we think we know about human behavior is the result of studying college sophomores who sign up for surveys and show up for their appointment. Not exactly a representative sample. And most survey data is not a good random sample of a population, let alone a complete population. Connected products have the opportunity to change that. They have the opportunity to gather accurate, timely data. That's what I had prepared for you. We started a little late, so I can take, like 1 question, but all my contact information was up on that screen a moment ago. And I welcome questions, but does anyone have a question that they really want to share with the whole group? By the way, I'm here for the rest of the day, and I might have a little bit more time when I do the wrap-up thing at the end of the day. But anyone want to bring up something right now? I can barely see you, so you're going to have to be very conspicuous. Nope? Okay, then let's move on with the day. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you again.